Hello everyone, welcome to the Red Motorbike channel. This time we're talking about crossovers, but not just a single bike. Instead, we're doing a comparison of several bikes. We have 5 models in this comparison, which we believe represent the best models in the Maxi Crossover segment. Specifically, the BMW S1000XR, the Honda NT1100 ES with DCT transmission, the Suzuki GSX-S1000GX, the Kawasaki Versys 1100 SC, and the Yamaha Tracer 9 GT plus Y-AMT, which is the smallest of the group, with the 890 CP3 engine but equipped with a robotic transmission. 2 transmissions are also going head-to-head, DCT versus Y-AMT, but above all, these 5 bikes currently represent, in our opinion, the best that the crossover segment has to offer. We've put them up against each other, we'll tell you how they're built, and we'll share our opinions on how they perform. We'll see you back here in the studio at the end to discuss our ratings and to determine which one is the best. As with all our comparison tests, as you well know, we use the same tires on all bikes because we believe that putting all the motorcycles on an equal footing, eliminating an important variable, which is the original equipment tires, often chosen not just for quality but also for price, is the best way to judge the chassis performance. And in this case, let's say that the partner for the entire Red League of Sport touring crossovers is the new Metzeler Roadtec 02, which Metzeler describes as a super sport touring tire, so it seems perfectly suited to equip the bikes in this comparison. What are the features of the Roadtec 02? Metzeler describes it as an interactive tire, or rather an intelligent tire, because the grooves you see on the tread are able, when the tire is under pressure, so when the tire is compressed by the work of the bike, when there is grip on dry surfaces, to close up, thus increasing the contact patch. Of course, dual compound technology is a given on a sport touring tire, but this feature, which Metzeler has even patented, is something new. What does this mean? On wet surfaces, when there is little pressure, the grooves stay open and channel away the water. On dry surfaces, when the tire is subjected to more load from the bike, the grooves close up and you have a larger contact patch on the ground. Obviously, on some of these bikes, Metzeler really made its presence felt, significantly improving the handling, especially with a front tire that truly offers great lateral grip. The Metzeler Roadtec 02 is the tire partner for this comparison, and it will be for the next 2 as well. It's a tire that really knows what it's doing on these bikes.
The sporty crossover, though not BMW's most extreme, was updated just last year, smoothing out the minor rough edges that hadn't fully convinced us, while leaving its inherent sportiness unchanged. Not by chance, the XR doesn't come from an enduro bike, but from a naked like the S1000R, a bike from which the BMW S1000 and the XR 2025 take everything we know and bring it into the crossover world. The claimed weight is 227 kilograms ready to ride with a full tank of fuel. Our scale showed 224 kilograms with 5 liters in the tank. The BMW is among the lightest bikes in the comparison. The price starts at 20,400 euros, but with packages and electronics it goes up to 25,070 euros. It's the sportiest of the crossovers, but the question remains, how practical is it really for long trips? We'll find out together.
Well, what can I say? It's kind of the canon of our comparison in every sense, because underneath here is the heart of the first S1000RR. So we're talking about a super bike disguised as a crossover. First of all, ergonomics. Among the bikes we have here, it's definitely the one with the highest seat. You can feel it. It's not the most accommodating for those who are a bit shorter in the leg, but once you're in the saddle, it's very comfortable. I'm 1.80 meters tall and I pay a lot of attention to these things, and I really like the seating position. Up front, the seat is fairly narrow. It widens a bit towards the back and there's enough space. The position of the foot pegs isn't too far back. In fact, it's quite central, especially considering the overall character of this bike. And then with the handlebar being just wide enough, it gives you good leverage. As for the passenger side, the portion of the seat meant for the person sitting behind isn't bad at all. The foot pegs are a bit tucked in and slightly set back, but even in terms of height, there's enough space for a passenger of average size. Moving on to riding comfort, adjusting the windscreen is very easy, but it only allows you to choose between two positions. When it's set to the lower position, a bit of air hits your face, but it doesn't create excessive turbulence. On the other hand, when it's in the higher position, it protects the helmet quite well without causing too much turbulence. Of course, given its rather tapered shape, your shoulders and arms still remain fairly exposed. Moving on to the highway and the topic of vibrations at 130 kilometers per hour, after Suzuki, this bike has the highest engine speed, and there are some vibrations, although I have to compliment BMW because they've managed to dampen them really well. Now the handlebar vibrates less, though there are still some vibrations on the grips and a bit on the foot pegs, but there has definitely been progress. Where the bike still vibrates quite a bit, however, is the seat area, especially when the engine is under load and also when you let off the throttle, where up front you feel a slight vibration. We have mixed opinions regarding the gearbox, more specifically the quick shifter. Personally, I really like it because it has a very short throw. It's true, it's a bit rubbery, but that doesn't bother me. As I mentioned earlier, you can really feel its super bike, super sport heritage here, even though they've done a great job making it usable across all rev ranges and at different speeds. A very flexible engine. At mid revs or just below, you can use it with just a touch of throttle and it responds well. Where it doesn't quite impress me is in throttle management, an area where BMW is usually a master. They taught us that with the Boxer engine. When you open the throttle, you can feel it on the chain. Even at 50 kilometers per hour in 6th gear, it holds well. The chain barely coughs. It doesn't slap, but it does slightly spoil the smoothness of power delivery that this engine has. For example, in a hairpin turn in 2nd gear, as soon as you get on the gas, you immediately notice this. It could be a characteristic of Euro 5, but where they have made up for it is in the low-end punch, which was somewhat lost in the previous Euro 5 version. Here it's been addressed. Another thing I'm not crazy about is the clutch, which is a bit sporty in its engagement, almost like a motocross or single-cylinder bike, because it's not among the smoothest. The release is always a bit abrupt and you have to get used to it. The center of gravity is high, and with the forged wheels option we have, it drops into corners by itself, which for me pairs perfectly with the tires we're using. The suspension doesn't work badly, but I wouldn't have minded something a bit more refined, especially in terms of electronic management. There are semi-active suspensions, but in my opinion, compared to, for example, the Showa ones we have here in the comparison, these are a bit behind, especially in terms of adjustment sensitivity and also in terms of options. Here you have auto for the monoshock for the preload, and then the rest is either road or dynamic, where in road mode it's always very soft and bounces a lot over bumps. Whereas in dynamic mode, it gains a lot in steering precision and entry speed, as if it needed it, but it becomes much harsher in absorbing bumps. The braking system is definitely not the most exciting among all the bikes we have here, but the rear brake, while not great, makes up for it fairly well with a pedal that's quite ergonomic, except that this part here sticks out too much, so I always end up touching it. The modulation isn't bad, and as for the front brake, the modulation isn't great, but there's no lack of braking power, even though, let's say, something a bit more refined could have been done here as well.
What I definitely liked about the BMW S1000XR is the engine, which is incredibly powerful and also very manageable, although a bit less so than in the past. One thing I would improve, on the other hand, is the suspension, which in my opinion, compared to the others in this comparison, has fallen a bit behind in terms of settings, but also in the differentiation between dynamic and road modes, because in that aspect I think the others do a little better.
It's not the first time we've included the NT1100 in our comparisons, and in 2022 we placed it among the sport touring bikes. To be honest, despite the numbers, which we'll get to, the NT1100 DCT performed very well. But back then it still hadn't received the gift of the Showa semi-active suspension and ERA, so we're very curious to see how it will fare against the so-called legends of the segment. In the meantime, the NT1100 has already won one battle, the numbers game. Since the Touring is the best-selling in Europe, the seat is at 820 millimeters. The fuel tank holds 20.4 liters, one of the largest capacities in this comparison, and the overall comfort is truly top-notch. The wheelbase is 1,535 millimeters, and the chassis geometry is average for the segment, neither too relaxed nor too aggressive. The windshield is electrically adjustable, and along with Yamaha, it's the only one to offer this feature.
To find a new light, I gotta move. Said I gotta move.
The Honda NT1100 definitely, along with the Yamaha, is a bit of an outsider in this comparison because, as we know, the NT project is much more oriented towards touring than towards sportiness. However, I have to say that we already included it in a comparison in 2022 and it performed very well. And even here, in my opinion, it has some good cards to play because, first of all, the arrival of semi-active suspension and also the refinement of the fairing have made it a bit sportier, if you will, compared to before. It's one of the most comfortable bikes overall in terms of rider triangle, which I personally like a lot. It's also one of the most comfortable for the passenger, and it will definitely compete for the very top spots in the ranking along with Kawasaki. It's a bike that even when you ride it with the passenger barely feels it. If you manage to make it sway into the corners by using the rear brake well because the front has a bit of a lift-up effect, in my opinion, when you really push on the brake and it gets a bit tricky to be smooth, entering the turn, that's when the bike manages to be very effective. We took advantage of the User 1 and User 2 mappings to customize the setup. It's always very smooth, very easy to use, very well balanced. I actually really like the chassis. Of course, if you try to make it do what it wasn't designed for, so being sporty, pushing it hard, riding it aggressively, it lets you know that's not its thing. So, smoothness above all. That smoothness is also found in the DCT gearbox, which, in the internal battle among automated and dual-clutch transmissions, wins for the smoothness of its shifting because it's truly imperceptible. In my opinion, when it comes to managing the initial throttle opening, like when you're making a U-turn or going through a roundabout, it still has some room for improvement. It's better than previous DCTs, but it's still a bit abrupt in use. The different riding modes are sufficiently distinct from each other, and the difference in engine braking is also noticeable when you adjust it, so from this point of view, I'm very satisfied. However, it remains a gearbox that, if you use it in drive mode, tends to shift up a lot to take advantage of the engine's torque, which, it's true, has a lot of torque at low revs, maybe even a bit too much. So my favorite is S1, but talking with the guys, I noticed they also really appreciate S2. But when you drive, even if not in an extremely dynamic way, let's say that in the end, manual intervention is a bit more frequent compared to Yamaha, especially when downshifting, because the gearbox tends to hold the gear a bit too long, even in S1 and S2 modes. In other words, it keeps the gear high and you lose a bit of engine braking. In terms of aerodynamic protection, it's obviously one of the best. As for heat management, it's not bad, even though a bit of heat does come through with the new fairing. I remember the old one being a little better in terms of heat management. And if there's one thing we have to point out about the NT project, which I remind you is one of the best-selling touring bikes in Europe, it's a bit of a lack of personality in the twin-cylinder engine. It's very smooth, but compared to the others, maybe a touch more character wouldn't hurt. And a bit more quickness in revving up would be nice too. For the rest, it's truly a complete bike for those who want to travel. Among other things, it's the only one here with a steel frame instead of an aluminum one, and it's one of the heaviest. I repeat, as long as you ride it at its own pace, it's very nice and also very well balanced in my opinion. But when you start to push it, the weight does make itself felt. Perhaps the only thing missing from the Honda to make it truly complete in terms of features is an electrically adjustable windscreen. In my opinion, the Showa suspension is always very, very well tuned. I like how when we change the settings, you can really feel the difference. And in terms of semi-active systems, they're among the best available on any bike. I'm talking about all brands.
What did I like about the Honda NT1100 DCT? Definitely the ride and the seating position, even with a passenger. I'm referring to the space, the room available, and therefore the comfort on long journeys. What I think could be improved at this point is the engine, especially when compared to other competitors. It's not just a matter of power, but also how the power is delivered from low revs, even though you can choose different engine characteristics with the various riding modes. The Versys is Kawasaki's offering for those who don't want to compromise between touring and reliability. The updated 4-cylinder engine now reaches 1,099 cubic centimeters, and compared to the 1,000, it has increased in power up to 135 horsepower at 9,000 revolutions per minute, with 112 Newton meters of torque achieved at just 7,600 revolutions per minute. Not bad at all for a 4-cylinder, maybe not as explosive as some others, but definitely super smooth and really enjoyable. However, you do feel the weight. It's listed at 259 kilograms, and with 5 liters, we measured 249 kilograms. On paper, it's not the most agile, but be careful when you push it, because once you stiffen the suspension, it becomes very, very effective. Price, 17,590 euros, already fully equipped. In summary, a lot of substance and a lot of comfort, but it will have to face lighter and sportier rivals.
Overall, it's definitely not the newest bike in our comparison, but it's an extremely balanced and extremely effective motorcycle with the right mix of sportiness and touring attitude. Now I'll explain why. Ergonomics, well, there's enough space for the passenger to carry 2 if you wanted. I mean, you only have 1 set of foot pegs, but you could probably squeeze 2 people on the back here. There's really a lot of room, plenty of space for the rider. The seat padding is nice, maybe a tad soft for my taste, but that's really just nitpicking. The riding position for me at 180 is just right. It's not tiring, you have a nice upright posture, the handlebars are just the right width, you get good leverage, nice grips. The distance between my torso and the handlebars is excellent, so my arms are never too stretched out. It's just very effective. The foot pegs are perfectly centered, aerodynamic protection here too. You could almost consider riding without a helmet once the windscreen is all the way up, but if you're tall like me, you'll be looking through the top of the windscreen, which distorts the view a little. I'm not crazy about that. Even at highway speeds, it never sends back a stream of air that causes head buffeting. That's an absolutely positive thing. And when it's all the way down, it protects less, but it still offers a ton of protection. So a great job was done in that regard. It also protects the shoulders well and the legs a bit too. It doesn't leave them completely exposed. The only downside in this regard is the adjustment, which is a bit fiddly. You have to unscrew this knob here, pull it down and then screw it back in. It's not the, let's say, the quickest thing in the world. Cruise control, it's good because unlike other Japanese bikes in this comparison, it has all the controls on the left switch gear, which is better, and most importantly, they're easy to operate. What's not so great is that to see what speed you've set, you always have to press the set or minus button, and it shows you the speed for about 1.5 seconds, and then it disappears. I'm not a huge fan of that. The system, by the way, responds to commands pretty quickly, both for increasing and decreasing speed, and disengaging it with the negative travel, that extra throttle play, is very smooth. And then contributing to all that comfort is the engine, which is, I don't know what to tell you. It has a smoothness, a full-bodied power delivery. It's electric in a good way. The throttle management is good with a super smooth gearbox, maybe a bit rubbery, but very smooth, and the right gear ratios. The torque for an inline-4 is great down low. This bike almost has 2 personalities. It's not super quick to rev, but you can use the low end of the rev range, put it in 4th, and you never have to shift out of it. You can take hairpin turns in 3rd with a clutch that is incredibly soft. It takes a while to get to the high end of the rev range, but once you keep it there, then a sporty inline-4 character comes out with a setup that, in my opinion, is super neutral. It's never stiff, but the bike is very difficult to unsettle. There's a dynamic balance that is truly out of this world. It's a bike that really lets you enjoy the ride, and it lets you travel in absolute comfort. It never tires you out with an engine sound that is, well, an inline-4. And when it revs, it has a nice deep sound. The brakes don't exactly shine in terms of sportiness or braking power, but they work well. And the suspension, as I said, is very balanced. The Showa electronics developed with Kawasaki work very well. You can always find the ideal setting, including for the preload. The hydraulics work very well. The fork action is super smooth. The things I like less aren't so much about the dynamics or the bike's behavior, but more those things I mentioned, like the display, the cruise control, the windscreen adjustment, and up here where you can see all the electrical connections for the dashboard inside. It's not great. There's a 12-volt socket here, a classic cigarette lighter style, and when you see it you think, that's not bad. But then what did they do? They added a USB-C port, which for a bike that isn't super advanced technologically or doesn't have the latest high-tech gadgets, you'd say, wow, that's a great choice. It's a shame they decided to put it here where it looks like a card reader from some camera. We could ask someone to try and insert a card now. It's a bit bulky, I don't really get it. I mean, they certainly didn't modify the dashboard for it, but, well, placing it here like this isn't the best. Then the switchgear isn't the newest, and changing the mapping, for example, isn't super intuitive. But these are minor details, because then you look at everything else and you say, wow, this bike works really, really well. It's got a lot of substance, and I have to say it's one of the most enjoyable to ride.
The thing I liked most about this bike is definitely the engine, a very smooth engine, almost electric in the best sense of the word. To use a metaphor, it's like a cream. What I really can't get over though is everything you see behind the windscreen from the riding position. Above all, you can see that trellis frame that supports the windshield. In my opinion, this really lowers the perceived quality, which doesn't do justice to the completeness and beauty of this bike.
Suzuki's offering in the crossover segment, by the way. One of the latest models to arrive is called the GSX-S1000GX. It has something in common with BMW. Both of these crossovers are based on their respective naked bikes, so they don't hide their inherent sportiness. Not by chance, its 999 cubic centimeter four-cylinder engine has very noble sporting origins, those of the GSX-R, which has thrilled so many enthusiasts. Power, 152 horsepower, one of the highest, but if we consider the thousands, the torque value is at the lower end, with a peak of 105 Newton meters reached at 9,250 revolutions per minute. The price for the base version stops at just 15,300 euros on the price list, so it's not only the lightest, but also the most affordable. For the tested model with panniers and a comfort seat, you'll have to write a check for 16,900 euros. If you want to travel, you should look at the touring version, which is not available for this comparison. For the requested 17,100 euros, it adds heated grips and a center stand to what you see here. Naked bike agility, crossover comfort, and plenty of power. Suzuki has gone all out. Will it be the most dangerous outsider?
Suzuki GSX-S1000GX, the crossover offering from the house of Hamamatsu, and also the latest arrival in the segment. You can tell both by riding it and just by sitting on it that this bike is positioned on the sporty side of sport touring. It's the smallest in terms of size together with the Yamaha, but while the Yamaha is an 890, here we're talking about a 1000. The seat to foot peg distance is fairly limited, so the foot peg is set a bit back, but let's say that if I had to recommend it to someone, if I had to recommend one of these bikes to someone who isn't that tall, this is probably the bike I would suggest. We know the technical foundation. It's very well known because the four-cylinder engine is the one derived from the legendary K5, which, by the way, I also used in the Andronis World Championship. It's a truly indestructible engine, full of torque, even though among the 8 here, it's the one with a peak torque just slightly higher than the Yamaha's, 106 Newton meters. However, Suzuki has acted cleverly by seeking out low-end torque, shortening the gear ratios. The result is that the bike is always super responsive, maybe even too responsive, especially in mapping A, which is the active one, where the throttle response is hyper-reactive, and I don't like it very much. In fact, I always use B because it's a bit more subdued, a bit more natural. However, when you're on the highway, the engine revs, but it's not a bike that consumes a lot anyway. So in terms of the engine, let's say there's this hyper-reactivity that definitely places it in the sporty category. It could also be one of the most agile bikes, but unfortunately the 190/50 tire does make itself felt, even though with the Road 02 it's a nice 190/50. However, compared to the 180 and compared to the 190/55, the bike tends to lean a bit more on the rear. The front, on the other hand, works very well. If there's one thing I have to say I really liked, it's definitely the gearbox, which is super fast, very sensitive, and really precise when you engage the gears. One thing I didn't love though is the braking system, especially the front, because I think the rear actually works very well. The front lacks bite, lacks that initial grip, and even when you pull hard compared to the others in this comparison, the bike struggles a bit more to stop. Of course, if you really pull, you're still well within safe margins, but for a bike that's positioned as sporty as this one, the braking performance could be better. For the passenger, it's definitely not the most comfortable. Along with the BMW, it has a slightly smaller seat and also quite a significant height difference between the rider and passenger, plus not much legroom. The windscreen isn't adjustable. There's a taller optional windscreen, so the wind protection is the lowest among all the bikes in this comparison. On the plus side though, there's no turbulence of any kind. I should also mention something else we didn't really like, the cruise control. When you activate it, it doesn't tell you what speed you've set, and that's, well, sometimes it's a bit annoying when you're on the highway, but on the other hand, the cruise control engages and disengages very, very smoothly. To sum up, definitely a great engine, which Suzuki has made the most of to give the bike torque and liveliness. The gearbox is certainly good, and the chassis is very agile. The bike is light and compact. We'd like to see a 190/55 tire and a more refined throttle response. Something a bit less hyper sport and a bit more crossover would be appreciated. As for wind protection, if you add the adjustable windscreen, the bike becomes very competitive. By the way, it's also one of the best looking bikes. One last thing, the headlight system. We tested it at night and there's still some room for improvement. The lighting isn't inadequate, but it's definitely not on par with the best. The scores will be very important for this bike, which also has other good features like the Showa suspension with a Suzuki specific setup, which I really like. They're very responsive to adjustment. We'll see, because it's a unique mix, whether among the participants here sportiness or touring will come out on top. We'll see. Now we're going to look at the scores and find out how it will rank in the standings.
What I liked about the Suzuki was the suspension system, because it's quite well balanced with a fork that moves smoothly. What I didn't like so much, on the other hand, was the front brake, which doesn't have much bite, and especially when combined with the handlebar and the silent block that this bike is equipped with. It moves when you brake. At first it doesn't inspire much confidence, but once you get used to it, it's okay.
While it's true that it's the smallest in terms of engine displacement among the bikes in this comparison, it's equally true that the Yamaha Tracer 9 GT Plus stakes its claim with a level of technology that none of the other bikes here can even come close to boasting. It already won the crossover comparison in 2023, and now it's back to challenge some of the giants in the segment. But with even more technical features added, it's a true flagship, just with a slightly smaller engine. We already know its heart. It's the CP3 3-cylinder 890 cubic centimeters with 119 horsepower and 93 Newton meters of torque. Its power delivery and sound are definitely engaging, though maybe it just lacks that low-end punch that only extra cubic centimeters can give you. Yamaha states a curb weight of 232 kilograms, but we measured 227 kilograms with 5 liters of fuel in the tank. The price is 18,599 euros, already fully equipped in this configuration. It's the most technological and futuristic of the group. Yamaha has raised the bar. Now it's up to us to understand how much this electronics package really changes the ride and what makes it the best.
Gonna get a lot of laughs. Gonna get a lot of laughs.
So this one definitely ranks high on the leaderboard. Let's start as usual with the ergonomics. I feel comfortable in the saddle. The triangulation is just right. In my opinion, it's a very crossover style triangulation, very touring oriented. Nice upright position, the handlebar is high, and the foot pegs are very centered. They could have moved them a bit further back, but that would have sacrificed some comfort. So overall, I'd say it's good. Comfort on the seat. So the seat has nice padding, especially in the rear part, but in the front it tends to make you slide forward and puts pressure on the front area right here. Over long distances it can end up not being very comfortable, let's say. Then, as for the aerodynamic protection, your shoulders remain exposed because here too the windscreen is quite narrow at the ends, but the helmet's height protection is really excellent, nothing to complain about. As for your legs, I'd say they're among the most exposed, especially around the knee area. But, as I was saying, This part is very good. I also like the electronic adjustment of the windscreen. I like it because it gives a very premium feel, even if it's not that immediate, in the sense that you have to go into the menu to find it. It definitely allows for fine-tuning, which is very positive because it helps avoid any kind of turbulence. Still, a simple lever here to move it up and down would do the trick. Moving on with the comfort discussion, 3 cylinders, great engine, but it does vibrate. There are a few vibrations here and there. There's also a bit of heat that comes up. Nothing excessive. Let's say that among the bikes we have here in this comparison, none of them really stand out for engine heat. It's true, it has a smaller engine displacement, but it pulls really hard. It lacks a bit of torque compared to others, so this forces you to use the higher rev range when you want to go faster. There's also good gearing. Now let's talk about the gearbox. And above all, a nice flexible power delivery that allows you, even when you want to ride more smoothly or at a slower pace, to enjoy touring as well. As for the gearbox, here we need to open a discussion. It definitely comes down to personal preference. This is a gearbox with a slightly sportier character compared to, say, Honda's dual clutch system. I really love the paddle shifters. They're super ergonomic and the gear changes are incredibly fast with the gears clicking through one after another. But it does have a sporty character because even when you select the D mode, it still tends to hold the gear a bit longer and only shifts up when it's really necessary. It doesn't do it earlier to reduce vibrations, lower fuel consumption, or make the ride a bit more relaxed. It's not bad, it's very quick when downshifting and really smart when you brake hard and need to drop 2 gears in a row. For everyday use, I would have liked something a bit softer, a bit more touring oriented. Even though it's not one of the lightest bikes, it's still pretty quick when entering and setting up for a corner. Very precise, very stable, it does exactly what you tell it to do, and it also pairs really well with these tires. I also like the brake controls. I appreciate the modulation you get from the front brake lever, and I don't mind the rear brake either. Maybe I would have liked just a bit more braking power, or at least to have it kick in a little earlier, but aside from that, I have no complaints. The suspension works well, there's a lot of room for adjustment. You can really fine-tune it to your liking. The only thing it's missing in this regard is electronic preload because it's manual, so it forces you to adjust it by hand every time. If it had that, it really would have been the cherry on top, considering everything else that's included. As for the features, as I mentioned, the electronic windscreen and blind spot detection are a huge help. There's the radar. Basically, everything you could wish for is here. There's plenty of space for the passenger, a good-sized seat, the handles aren't bad, maybe the foot pegs are set a bit inward and the panniers stick out a little here, but I have to say, the level here is very high. Another addition to the features are the lights. You may or may not like the design, but it's great that it has cornering lights. So when you lean into a turn, the inside light comes on to give you more visibility, but the matrix headlights really make a huge difference. They're even better than some car headlights. You can see absolutely everything. Last night we came back, we rode up in pitch darkness, and this really makes a difference.
What I liked about the Tracer was the riding position because I found it to be a good compromise between comfort and sportiness. I also really like the engine because I always find it very smooth and very flexible. On the other hand, I wasn't very convinced by the gearbox when it's in D, as it always feels very sporty and tends to hold the gears for too long.
Up, down, turn myself around, spinning in the streets of 3, 4, knocking on your door, I just wanna find a home. Left, right, maybe I decide which angel I listen to. 5, 6, losing my grip, so what am I gonna do? I was always lost till I found my way, then I found you.
We're back in the studio after our very long ride through the Italian Alps. Truly beautiful places that I recommend you visit if you ever come to Italy. Let's go in order. Let me remind you how our ratings are structured. The scores are out of 30, so the minimum score is 18 and the maximum is 30 for each category that we will be rating. All 5 testers voted together, and without knowing what the others were voting, At the end, we will add the score for price and the score for equipment because there will be differences there as well. The bike with the most features gets more points, while the most expensive bike gets fewer points to balance out the fact that a bike with lots of features and a high price isn't necessarily competitive. We will add in the luggage, the passenger scores, and we will end up with a ranking of all the bikes included in our comparison. Let's go in order and go through each category, starting with the engine. In this case, as you can see in the table, BMW scored 971 points, and so together with Yamaha, which is ahead of BMW by just 1 point, it is leading this engine ranking. The green dots, as you can see, indicate the points where each bike outperforms the others. So the ranking is as follows: Yamaha with 972 points, BMW with 971 points, Kawasaki with 935 points, thanks to its new 1100 engine, which is really very enjoyable to use, Suzuki with 877 points, and Honda with 863 points, which pays a bit for having less power and perhaps also a bit less character compared to the engines present in this comparison. Voice, ergonomics, and comfort are very important on bikes like these crossovers, which were created not only for us to have fun riding, but also to be able to travel, maybe with a passenger, maybe with luggage. In this area, there are many aspects to consider. Let's start with the mirrors, the ease of using the menus, the dashboard, handling the bike when the engine is off. In short, there are many factors that make up a ranking here as well. In this case, it's Yamaha that comes out on top, even though it doesn't have that many more green points compared to the others. But on average, the Yamaha crossover, so the 309 GT Plus with the Y-AMT shifter, let me remind you, is superior, let's say, to its direct competitors. 1,755 points for it. Second place goes to the Kawasaki Versys 1100 SE, which is really not far behind Yamaha. It offers great features, an excellent seat, outstanding passenger comfort, and generally very few vibrations. In short, a really well-made bike. In third place is Honda, which in terms of comfort definitely does an excellent job with the NT. In fourth and fifth place are the two bikes in this comparison that stand out for their sportier character. The S1000 XR with 1,697 points, and last, the Suzuki with 1,611. Suzuki and XR clearly show how, in this particular segment, the crossover segment, manufacturers can choose to tip the scales a bit more towards sportiness or alternatively more toward comfort and touring capability. In this case, BMW and Suzuki are definitely two bikes that are more powerful, more high-performing, more aggressive, if you will, and undoubtedly sportier. But when it comes to taking a trip with a passenger and luggage in terms of wind protection, passenger accommodation, seat comfort, and even vibrations, they perform a little less well than the others. And so this is the ranking as far as ergonomics and comfort are concerned. Let's move on to the chassis, to the frame, and here too there are different characteristics, meaning there are bikes that are definitely positioned in a more sporty way and bikes that are positioned in a more touring-oriented way. In this case, it's nice to see that there are some who manage to do both things quite well. The Kawasaki Versys 1100 SE takes the top spot in the ranking with 1,262 points. So despite its size, despite its weight, despite the comfort it manages to offer, when it comes to the frame, this bike really performs very well. Credit also goes to the equipment because the Showa components fitted by Kawasaki are definitely top-notch, also shared with Suzuki. But overall, in terms of brake performance, agility, and ease of riding, the Versys manages to do just a bit better than the others. In second place, and so always right there, always close, is Yamaha with 1,236 points. In third place, we find Honda, in this case, which we liked because all things considered, the NT does have a calm engine, but in terms of chassis performance, it really works very well. It also comes with Showa components, so it's no coincidence that the bikes with Showa have done quite well. 1,198 points, just 1 point ahead of the BMW S 1000 XR, which has 1,197 points. The BMW is starting to show its age a bit. In short, the design is no longer the freshest, and for this reason, it lost a few points along the way because the brakes aren't that effective. They're a bit aggressive. On the other hand, BMW excelled in all aspects of handling and agility, but that's because the bike we had in the comparison was simply equipped with forged wheels, which really make a difference when we evaluate the bike's agility, whether in tight or fast riding situations. However, for some people, the forged wheels were even too much, and this caused BMW to lose a few more points along the way. For this comparison, we also did a special kind of voting. We rated the sporting attitude and the touring attitude of each bike present. This was to help us imagine that, in the end, the best bike is the most complete one, the one that does both things best. In this case, if we're talking about sporting attitude, BMW wins hands down with 146 points. If, on the other hand, we're talking about touring attitude, obviously, and it seems pretty logical given the bikes in this comparison, the Honda NT1100 and Kawasaki Versys really make a difference. To complete the scoring, we give the passenger ratings, where Kawasaki comes out on top with 475 points, Honda is second with 464, which was also quite logical. Yamaha is third with 443, followed by BMW with 406, and Suzuki, which has a somewhat small seat and rather limited protection, with 387. In terms of equipment, Yamaha wins hands down. Even though it's a bike with a relatively small engine displacement, its CP3 3-cylinder is 890 cubic centimeters, the smallest among those in this comparison. When it comes to features, nothing beats it. Matrix LED, radar, it really has everything. So it scores 81 points. Some data regarding weight. The best weight recorded in this comparison is that of the Suzuki at 223 kilograms with 5 liters of fuel in the tank. We weigh all the bikes with 5 liters of fuel so that at least the weights are comparable. In second place is BMW with 224, third is Yamaha with 227, fourth is Honda with 243, and fifth is Kawasaki, which is very large and also very heavy at 249. As you can see, from the lightest to the heaviest, there's quite a difference of over 20 kilograms. To conclude our final ranking, which takes into account all the categories, consumption, weight, everything including the bags, the price, in short, all the aspects we evaluated, sees Yamaha as the winner with 4,801 points. Second place goes to Kawasaki with 4,761 points. Third to BMW with 4,625 points, followed by Honda with 4,616 points, and then a bit further behind the Suzuki GSX-S1000GX with 4,389 points. It's a bike with good potential, but clearly it lacks a few more features to be truly competitive in a segment where you obviously need to perform well in all situations, excel on long trips, and also handle sporty riding well. These are our report cards. These are our evaluations of the bikes in this comparison. If you have any questions for us, leave them below in the comments. We'll be waiting for you. See you in the next video on Red Motorbike.